Welcome to another Wisdom podcast with Samantha Davidson. She's a creative producer at Podify. She helped produce really cool shows like The Language of Love with Dr. Laura Berman and Off the Cuff with Danny Lowe Prybro. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's a mental health podcast with comedian Danny. So today we're going to talk about podcasting, how to run podcasts, how to make interesting shows, and so on. This pod is presented by my company. It's called podfire.com. If you want to start scale, be invited to podcast, go to podfire.com. Sam, glad to have you on. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So like you said, I am a creative producer slash podcast producer. I work mainly for a company called Podify. I also do some freelance work as well. I have been working in the podcast industry for about 8 or 9 years. I started off in Los Angeles. I'm originally from the Midwest in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to college at the University of Southern California in LA. I was there for 14 years. I worked in media and entertainment that entire time. Actually, right before COVID hit, I was a red carpet reporter, and I was interviewing celebrities and directors and writers and also doing podcasting on the side. But the red carpet reporting really, really helped me for what I do now, which is help produce podcasts, because I asked great questions. I would be told so many times, wow, I've never been asked that question before, or that's an amazing question. So when I work with my clients now, I help prep them for their interviews. That's a part of my job. And I always try to come up with questions that are outside of the box. I listen to other podcasts the guest has been on, and I try to just kind of steer away from the normal conversation and just have them open up about something new and interesting that'll get people's attention.
So, how great questions. If we dissect them, they have many components. So, first, you need to be able to get an answer right, like sort of gate in the gated community, but not too far. Get the permission right. So, there's like a premise to the question. Then the question needs to be relevant to the audience as well. They need to know the answer to that question. Needs to be entertaining. Needs to be educating most of the time. So how do you make up a list of great questions for your guests?
So, what I first would say is you want the guest to feel comfortable. You want to compliment them. You want them to know that you chose them to be on this podcast because you researched them and you found their work interesting. Going into a podcast, asking the person just very almost, simple questions and having that take up the entirety of the interview is such a mistake that many podcasters will fall into. So it's having first and foremost a clear background about who the person is. So sometimes with questions, when I'm doing it myself or when one of my clients is doing it, I will have them phrase it, I know that you did X, Y, and Z already. I know that you participated in this summit. I know that you wrote this short film. So you kind of top on top of that question with, with that background that you have, what do you think about? And then you kind of go into a more in-depth question, either something about current events, pop culture, something that's topical, but you want that guest to feel like you already know them, you're impressed with them, you like them. And that, I mean, the questions can be good. Good questions are important, but it really is important to like create a rapport with the guests. So they just open up to you because they like you.
Right. Then how do you make sure that in the first place, this guest is the right person for your audience?
Yeah, what so many people I find fall down the rabbit hole of is I want to know how many followers they have. And that is a qualification to be on this podcast. What a lot of people don't know, especially in the older generations, is that people can buy followers. It's really, really easy to buy followers. So to have that be your number one qualification is a downfall. And I think that, making sure that you align or understand with their message and their mission, of course, go on their social media pages. It is important, I think, for the person to have a social media presence of some sort or to have a book. I think both is good, but you need to really be able to somehow delve into who the person is. And see if they align with what your audience likes, what they talk about. And it's interesting. I mean, Chat GPT for me has helped me kind of like find some interesting people that I never would have found before. I know, people have different thoughts and opinions about Chat GPT, and I do think that it can be abused in certain ways, or just kind of it can send you in the totally wrong direction. But as far as finding guests that align with your message and that are maybe similar to somebody else that you've had or that you've liked to have, you put in Chat GPT, give me a list of 50 people similar to, and then they'll give you a list, and then you start your research, then you do your research and you decide who's the best fit.
Love that approach. Yeah, I use Claude and Chat GPT in some instances to get list of podcast sponsors. So I thought that was really interesting and segues kind of nicely in the next topic, which is monetizing podcast. I have people on this pod that convert into clients of mine with various of my companies. I have sponsors as well, where I have Qualia, that's a brain supplement, and I have Biooptimizers here. That's a nice magnesium supplement that sponsor my pod. So how should one actually monetize a podcast in 2024?
Yeah, the truth is that it's not always easy. You have to have some kind of downloads or a following to get those sponsors. But yes, sponsorship is one way. And then this is also might be controversial, but paid advertisements to even just get your numbers up to the place that they need to be. You kind of have to invest in your podcast a lot of times, unless you are a celebrity sometimes or have a big following, it will happen naturally. But there's companies where you can pay to have advertisements on their app. For instance, there's Castbox, and that has proven really successful for some of our clients. So when we're going for those sponsors, or when we're going for an ad read or whatever, that the numbers are legitimate and they show that you do have a following, that you can get a better deal. I find sometimes what people do is they want to monetize and get sponsors right away when they have very little downloads and very little following. My advice always is to do what you can. A lot of times that's through paid advertisements, to get those numbers up so you can get a legitimate partner. And also, placing ads on other podcasts and having the host read them. Me as a podcast listener, I'm kind of a sucker for that. Like, if a podcast host that I like and listen to on a regular basis does an ad read for a show that sounds interesting for me, I am much more likely to at least listen to the trailer and give it a listen. And so from there, you can monetize. But in my eyes, you kind of have to build something first and make sure your content is what you want it to be, because podcasts are a platform. They're not necessarily a money making machine for a lot of people. It's a way to sell products. If you have a book that you want to sell, it's always really good to do things like that. But I think some people that start podcasts that don't know much about the industry kind of just think they can start and get paid automatically, and that's not typically the way that it works.
And if you can buy your followers, how do you convince a sponsor to pay you?
Well, I mean, I'm talking about buying your followers as far as Instagram, Twitter, things like that. But this isn't exactly buying your followers. It's putting your podcast to an audience that might not have seen it before. Like for Castbox, they will have these 6-day campaigns, and Castbox is a really big podcast player. It's mostly a male demographic, so we kind of send most of our male dominated shows there if they'd like to do an ad there. But they have a banner at the top of their page with our podcast. It's paying for that placement for 6 days. People click on it, they get introduced to the show, and they start to listen to it. And then they continue listening to it. So those numbers that you get from those kinds of things, they're not fake, they're real. But the show was just put in front of an audience that it never was put in front of before, in front of a ton of people that never would have seen it before. Same with an ad read on a popular show. You're paying money to get your ad read, but it's the people that are actually looking up the podcast that are playing it and giving it a try. And then if it's a good show, then it will sustain those downloads.
Tell me about Podify and why it's an interesting company.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm not exclusively with Podify, but I've worked very, very closely with them, helping them build their company for the past 2.5 years. What I really like about Podify that's cool and I think unique from different podcast production companies is we have a podcast launch program. So it goes at the pace of however fast the client wants to go. I would say usually about 8 weeks, but we meet with them every single week to get them completely set up to start their podcast. It's a lot of business owners or just people that want to start a podcast. They think they're funny. They do stand up, let's say, and they just don't know how and they don't have the time or bandwidth. So we basically just walk them through the process and launch their show. So I don't really know of any other company that can really hold the client's hands like we do as we start their show. And then after we launch it, we continue to help them and grow and guide them and things like that. But I really like the aspect of the podcast launch. And it's really fun for me as a producer as well to be there from start, from just an idea, just maybe even not even a name yet, just a simple idea and a host. We help them brainstorm with them to come up with the name, to come up with artwork, to come up with what a run of show looks like. And, sometimes they decide after that to kind of, they can do the rest on their own. They feel confident. A lot of times, they continue to work with me as a creative producer, which I think mostly the reason people don't do that is just because it's an extra expense. But I obviously really recommend it just because I can really help guide the process. I can help book guests. I do prep work. I go through the episode with a fine-tooth comb. I highlight things that should be cut that don't need to be there. And I work closely with our editors to make it really tight and a really good episode.
Talking about that, I started various podcast concepts lately. One is CEO Crib instead of MTV Cribs. One is Pimp My Business instead of Pimp My Ride. Another is like Spark Tank. And then I'm starting Founder Shore instead of Jersey Shore. So what is a good podcast concept, and what's the limitation between like media and podcasting? Because the CEO cribs, for example, it could be still on a Zoom call and the CEO could film his crib and guide us. And yeah, it's really low edit, sort of my style, So what are
Mhm.
cool concepts that you've came up with, and what do you have to say about podcasts being audio visual nowadays?
As far as podcast being audio visual, so I in LA where I really started my podcasting journey, I was working for a company called AfterBuzz TV, and Maria Menounos, who's a really famous television personality, she owned the company with her husband, and they had a beautiful studio in North Hollywood. So that was both audio and visual. And, it was big on YouTube. It was also on all of the audio platforms. But then once COVID hit, most people are not in studio anymore. And even if they are in studio, their guest most likely is still virtual. So I think it's kind of a different world that we're in now, pre 2020. But people do really want to see things. They want to be able to combine that audio experience with the visual experience. But for me personally, I'm an audio gal. Like I love audio because you're able to listen to it anywhere. Um, and I just even like in bed, at the gym, whatever you want. But I think it's important to have both, especially for social media purposes. On social media, I think like audiograms, which basically is just the audio with kind of different backgrounds and photos and things like that. I think you need to see the visual for social media. And I think it's great. I think hopefully as we get out more of the COVID phase of our lives, we will see more studio work, but we're also getting a little bit comfortable and complacent, like having it all be virtual. Because the truth is that like if you want to see a really good interview with someone like a celebrity, you want to see that in studio with the person and they're sitting next to each other. I feel like obviously it could still be good and impactful if it's virtual, but in person, it seems like a TV show. And at the end of the day, at least for me, like I love movies and TV. And so I kind of want to see things that are in like that similar vein of delivery. As far as helping people come up with a good podcast idea, podcast title, all of that. I think that niche is always great. Like not everybody's going to like you. Not everyone is going to be interested in the topic, and that's okay. Like I think people really need to lean into that more. Like what are you interested in? What are you good at? Because even if it might be a niche topic, there are probably millions of people in the world that are still into that thing. So I think by identifying a specific audience that you would like to get at, go for it. Don't worry about people not liking you or people not understanding it, because I think there's always people that will.
What are cool concepts of podcasts that you've seen lately?
Let's see. So I really love spiritual stuff. I had a podcast called Spiritual Spiral that I will be starting up again soon, but I really lean into the spiritual side of things. So right now, I'm working on a podcast with a very well-known medium and psychic, and it's about kind of life after death and how to connect with your loved ones that have passed without needing like to pay for a medium. Like how do you look at and see signs all around you? How do you yourself connect with loved ones that has passed? I mean, almost everybody has had someone that they love pass at some point in their life. So people can relate to that, but also kind of to open up the conversation that like they're still around and that you can still connect to them, I think is really special. So I love that idea. And I'm not going to say the name of who it is yet because she hasn't launched yet, but she also is releasing a really big book this summer. So we're going to kind of be paralleling the release of her book with the release of her podcast. And so I always think that's a good idea. I think authors are really great guests, and I think they could also be really great podcast hosts. And I think that kind of using podcasts as a platform to promote your books is really, really powerful.
What's the future of podcasting? I'm talking with lots of folks. We're talking about pod twins, like a virtual AI Charles interviewing Sam's virtual
Mm,
AI. We give them the data, the permission to say stuff. We vet the content because they could say a bunch of negative things
yeah.
as well, or stuff we don't even mean or want out there. There's also like converting or live words right now into videos to make
Mhm.
the content more entertaining. What are you seeing on your side?
I think that AI specifically can be used as a great tool. I don't think it'll ever truly replace a human being or human emotions. And I mean, this is coming from someone that worked on red carpets, interviewing some of the biggest celebrities and being able to truly connect with them on a human level, which, again, like I said earlier, makes them open up. It makes them feel warm inside. Like it makes them feel like this is a human being that might actually really care about me and what I have to say. And when, let's say an AI is interviewing somebody, like you're not going to get that same kind of emotional response. I mean, I do think there is a big fear about AI replacing people in a lot of ways. And I do think that that fear is relevant in certain jobs and industries. But I feel like with podcasting, for me, podcasting comes from the heart. And I don't think that that can be necessarily replaced with AI. Like my big thing is you always want to make the guests feel comfortable and happy. And that's a human part of connection that I don't think that AI can replace.
I'll disagree with that. I think an AI can do it even better than a human. It's just about saying the right words at the right time. If we check some of the history's worst dictators, Hitler, for example, he convinced people to do like stuff that's quite terrible, and he's quite a terrible human being, but he just used the right words, um,
Yeah.
right rhetorics, and I mean, Hitler's not is no AI, but what I mean by that is that words can be calculated, data can be retrieved, and right questions can be formulated way better by an AI that, in my opinion, has and statistically has better memory, better processing than a human. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally respect your opinion and don't think that you're totally wrong. Like, especially in the world that we live in today, propaganda is real, manipulation is real. We're seeing it firsthand on social media right now with people talking about things that they have no idea about just because they heard someone say X, Y, and Z, and it's actually very harmful to society for sure. And Hitler is a very good example. Um, I think it just depends on the topic. I just, like I said, I'm a very heart-centered person. Also, like I've done stand-up comedy. I did stand-up comedy for like 7 years in LA. I like people. I like being in front of people and talking to them. So maybe I'm a little bit biased because I would hate for AI to replace podcast hosts, but like I said, I do think that there's kind of a world that we can live in that combines both of our beliefs, that we can use AI as a tool in interviewing. I just know for me personally, like if you were an AI bot right now, I don't think we would be having like, I don't think I would be as open as I am. I don't know if I'd be as comfortable. Like I just for me, like let's say exactly like right now. But I think a combination of utilizing the technology and the human being is definitely where we're headed.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, you as a human wouldn't feel comfortable as an AI. You probably wouldn't have accepted the interview knowing that it's not a human doing the interviews. But maybe some folks, one, would be interested in trying out an AI interviewing them. One, two, maybe you could have your AI, I could have my AI. We don't have necessarily the time or sometimes even the interest, right? For example, there's been the Joe Rogan AI interviewing Donald Trump. Both probably do not want to meet, right? They have different agendas. But it's
Mm-hmm.
funny that, yeah, the two of them, they're two AIs, they're two virtual twins, could actually meet. And someone did it for Joe Rogan. It's not Joe Rogan that did it, but that could be a cool experiment. Um, Now, I don't think AI also would replace you. It would just be an alternative, for example. So there could be you doing like the first uh the real interview with people that you want to connect with. I also think your virtual pod twin could go out there and produce valid and valuable content with folks that you either don't have time to interview or even the interest or knew that they existed, for example. And that could even be used as a pre-interview to the real thing.
Yes.
um, so there's various use cases here, but thanks for sharing your opinion there. I'm curious, you met a bunch of celebrities over the past decade. So what have you
Mm-hmm.
learned from interacting with them?
That they're human beings and that they like to be complimented. That you can say it's a manipulation tactic, what have you, but celebrities are tend to be a little bit narcissistic. It's kind of just their job. Like they have to be a little bit obsessed with themselves, and getting that validation from someone that's interviewing them or somebody that's working with them, not in like an over the top way, but like I said earlier, just to say, I know you, I know your work, love that movie you were in. I love that niche TV show that you did in the UK that nobody has seen. I've seen it. And I think that it is especially kind of after COVID, it was a world I became a little bit less interested in because everybody became a politician somehow. Everybody, they were kind of, I think, stepping out of their bounds. But this is coming from somebody that has been obsessed with pop culture, movies, and TV since I was born. So it really was such a dream of mine. But I left LA after 14 years, and I've been gone since it's been almost 4 years, which is so crazy. But I do see the world in a bit of a different way now. It's not all about celebrities and entertainment. I don't almost idolize them as much as I used to. But I think now celebrities they should just be actors. That's all they should be. Or they should just be singers. That's all they should be. And there's no point to idolize them. But it definitely is a fun world to work in as long as you keep both feet on the ground, don't get caught up in the craziness of Los Angeles, narcissism, and all of that.
Wow. Yeah. Narcissism, I'm not sure if they can ever escape from that. It's
Yeah.
really hard because they really chose fame, it seems. Even if you want to, because yeah, money, power, fame, yeah. These seems to be three things to choose. Me, my main driver, I guess, nowadays is AGI, create an AGI and
Hmm.
Neuralink myself to it, but that's my weird self. Um, and I'm money driven, of course, but I do think that, yeah, also dissociating yourself and your personality and your identity in the sake of playing in a movie and being someone else, I think that's
Hmm.
really disruptive for an ego as well. So it's not an easy life. And when I would listen to you, I would think of, I don't know, like Leonardo DiCaprio. Um, been involved in random stuff, I guess, in the last couple of years, but I think as a human being, it can be cool. And especially as actors, I would encourage them to go into different fields because I mean, staying an actor is somewhat of a pain, as I just mentioned, like just like dissociating yourself all the time from who you really are. I think these people have really big problems finding themselves. And yeah, the LA environment can be quite harsh. So I don't know, go start a business, raise a fund, like we've seen that some of them do. But if you're referring to politics, yeah, politics can be even more trickier, I guess, than being an actor, right? I mean, what better actors than politicians? So yeah, if that's what you're
Yeah.
referring to, that can be very tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think in general, the way that media and entertainment, the way kind of things have been going and social media too, things just get a little bit out of control. And I mean, I myself, I went to theater school. I double majored in journalism and theater. But I wanted to be an actor too. I did since I was a little kid. And then, I kind of got to LA and you're right. Like met actors, saw what their lives were like, saw what their egos were like, and the struggles that they had. And I was like, you know what? I kind of think maybe I'll be behind the scenes. I'm still going to be creative. And, like I said, I still like to do stand up. I love to get up on a stage, talk in front of people. But it is, I mean, think about Heath Ledger. Like, people like that, like they can get completely mentally lost in a role and it can be dangerous for sure.
Yeah, and the opioids, I'm not sure, like I haven't studied Ledger in a while, but what an actor.
Hmm.
You also mentioned idealizing, so I think we're all guilty of that. And even I, up until I picked up podcasting 2 or 3 years ago, nowadays I'm way closer to the people that I used to idealize. I interviewed some of them on this podcast and really discovered that they were humans. It was really naive to think that they were godly. They do they have their own flaws, and they do mistakes every now and then. They're really good at some things, and they're really next level in some areas, but yeah, they're humans too, and being a human means pain and struggle every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, I idealized Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. I was watching Nick at Night when I was a very young kid, and I even named my dog Desi. And I had Lucille Ball literally hand painted on my wall. I wrote my college essay on her, everything. But when I wrote my college essay is when I realized, wow, these people were extremely flawed and had pretty hard lives, and they were not this kind of perfect image that I always had. I still love them, mostly Lucy. Desi shouldn't have named my dog after him. I'll just say that much after my research. But yeah, it's always interesting looking back and really getting to know who the person was instead of who you thought they were.
Right. Where can people find out more about you, Sam?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram. That's usually where I hang out, at SamD43. And if you ever want to email me any questions, talk about podcasting, my email is samdavidson87 at gmail.com.